Shohei, we're fans now. The reason why opposing Pirates players surrounded Ohtani after the Dodgers game. Nobody planned for this moment. Not Don Kelly. Not the Pirates players who had spent the entire game trying to get Shohei Ohtani out. Not the Dodgers coaching staff who watched from the opposite dugout as something unfolded on that field that had nothing to do with wins or losses or standings or statistics. Nobody scheduled what happened after that final out. It just happened. The way the most genuine things in baseball always happen. Without warning. Without a script. Without anyone telling anyone else what to do or how to feel or what it would look like from the outside. The opposing Pittsburgh Pirates players surrounded Shohei Ohtani after the game ended. And Don Kelly, their manager, standing at the edge of that moment, could not hide what was on his face. Not even a little. To understand what made that moment so heavy, you have to understand what came before it. The Dodgers and Pirates are not rivals in the traditional sense. There is no decades-long history of bitterness between these two franchises. There is no October memory that one side is still carrying. When these two teams share a field, the stakes are usually defined by the standings rather than by any deep competitive wound. But Shohei Ohtani changes the atmosphere of any game he enters. That is not mythology. That is not media construction. That is simply what happens when a player operates at a level that the sport has never quite seen before. The game feels different when he is in it. The attention shifts. The energy in the stadium reorganizes itself around where he is standing. The Pirates had spent the entire game experiencing that firsthand. They had watched him in the batter's box. They had watched him on the mound. They had watched him do the things that make opposing managers shake their heads not out of frustration but out of something that sits closer to disbelief. They had competed against him the way professional athletes compete. With preparation and effort and the genuine intention of winning. And then the game ended. And something shifted. It started with one player. That is usually how these things begin. One person makes a move that breaks the invisible wall between competitor and admirer. One person decides that what they witnessed over the course of 9 innings is too significant to simply walk away from without acknowledging. He approached Ohtani. Not aggressively. Not with the energy of someone who had something to prove or something to say that needed to be said loudly. Quietly. The way a person approaches someone when they are not entirely sure how the gesture will land but feel compelled to make it anyway. He said something. And then another Pirates player came over. And then another. Within a few minutes, Ohtani was standing in the middle of a loose gathering of opposing players. Men who had spent the last several hours trying to beat him. Men who had gone back to the dugout between innings and talked through approach adjustments and pitch sequences and ways to limit the damage he could do. Men whose entire professional purpose that evening had been to make sure Shohei Ohtani did not beat them. And now they were standing around him like people who had just witnessed something they needed to be closer to before it disappeared. Some of them had their phones out. One of them said it directly, clearly, with the kind of honesty that athletes rarely allow themselves in the middle of a competitive environment. Shohei, we're fans now. The words landed with a simplicity that made them hit harder than anything complicated could have. Not a speech. Not a formal acknowledgement. Just a sentence that said exactly what it meant. We spent tonight trying to beat you. We could not. And somewhere in the process of trying, we crossed a line from competitor to something that does not have a clean baseball term. We became fans. Don Kelly watched all of it from a distance that was close enough to see clearly and far enough to give the moment its space. His face in that moment told a story that his words would later try to catch up to. He is not a manager who performs emotion. Kelly has been around baseball long enough to understand that the game demands a certain composure from the people who run it. You win and you find a way to stay level. You lose and you find a way to stay level. You watch something extraordinary happen on a field that you are responsible for and you find a way to process it without letting it disrupt the professional face you are expected to maintain. But there are moments that arrive without asking for permission. And this was one of them. Something moved across Kelly's face as he watched his players gather around Ohtani. It was not embarrassment. It was not the awkward expression of a manager watching his team do something he wished they had not done. It was something quieter and more honest than either of those things. It was the expression of a person who had spent decades in professional baseball and was watching something happen that reminded him why he had spent those decades in professional baseball. He could not hide it. He did not try particularly hard to. After the game, a reporter asked Kelly about what had happened on the field. He took a moment before answering. Not a long moment. But enough of one that the room understood he was not reaching for a prepared response. He said he saw it happening and he did not stop it. There was a slight pause after that sentence. The kind of pause that means the next thing said will be more important than what just came before. He said that his players had competed as hard as they could compete tonight. He said they had prepared. They had executed their game plan in the ways they were capable of executing it. They had done everything that professional baseball players are supposed to do when they step onto a field against the best team in the league. And then he said something that the room did not entirely expect. He said that sometimes you are in the presence of something that goes beyond the game. And when that happens, the people who have given their lives to this sport recognize it. Because they understand better than anyone what it costs to do what Ohtani does. Because they know from the inside how difficult every single piece of it is. The hitting. The pitching. The preparation. The mental weight of carrying that much expectation into every game. His voice was quieter by that point. Not breaking. But quieter. He said his players were not showing weakness by approaching Ohtani after the game. He said they were showing something that the sport needed more of. The ability to compete fiercely and still recognize greatness when it stands directly in front of you. Ohtani handled the moment the way Ohtani handles most moments that exist outside the ordinary parameters of baseball. With a kind of calm warmth that does not draw attention to itself. He did not make the opposing players feel like they were doing something unusual. He did not create any distance between himself and the people surrounding him. He stood there in the middle of it with the easy comfort of someone who understood what the moment meant without needing to inflate it. He took the photos. He spoke to the players who spoke to him. He smiled in the way that people smile when something genuine is happening and they are present enough to feel it rather than just observe it. There is a version of Shohei Ohtani that exists in statistics and headlines and contract figures and record books. That version is extraordinary on its own terms. The numbers are real. The achievements are real. The history being made in real time is real. But the person standing in the middle of those Pirates players after the game was not the version that exists in statistics. That was the other version. The one that opposing players feel compelled to walk toward after a game they just lost. The one that makes a manager's composure slip slightly at the edges. The one that turns competitors into something they were not when the first pitch was thrown. Inside the Pittsburgh clubhouse, the conversation continued in the way post-game conversations continue when the loss is clean and the feeling left behind is complicated. One of the Pirates players who had been part of the gathering on the field sat in front of his locker and tried to explain what had happened. Not in the way that players explain tactical decisions or game situations. In the way that people explain something they are still processing themselves. He said that when you watch Ohtani on television, you understand intellectually that he is something different. The highlights make that clear enough. The numbers make that clear enough. Anyone who follows baseball knows what he is. But he said that being on the same field changes the understanding in a way that television cannot replicate. He said you feel it differently when you are trying to get him out. When you are the one watching the pitch come out of his hand and trying to calculate it in real time. When you are the one standing in the batter's box while he is on the mound. When you have spent an entire evening inside the actual experience of competing against him. He said it stops feeling like watching something remarkable and starts feeling like standing next to something that does not quite fit inside the normal categories. He shook his head slightly. He said he went over there after the game because he felt like if he did not, he would regret it. Like he would go home and think about the fact that he had been on the same field as Shohei Ohtani and had not said anything. He said it felt important to say something. Don Kelly spoke one more time before leaving the press area. A reporter asked him whether he thought the moment said something about where Ohtani stood in the history of the game. Kelly did not answer immediately. He looked at a point somewhere slightly past the reporter. The look of a person not searching for words but deciding which ones to use. Then he said that history was something other people wrote about after enough time had passed. He said he was not in the business of writing history. But then he said that in 30 years of professional baseball, across all the games and all the players and all the moments that accumulate across a career spent inside this sport, he had never seen opposing players gather around someone like that after a game. Not like that. Not with that energy. Not with that particular combination of respect and wonder and the simple human need to be close to something extraordinary before it walked off the field. He said he hoped his players remembered it. Not because the Dodgers won. Not because the scoreboard said what it said. But because moments like that one did not come along often. Moments where the sport stripped away everything around it and left behind something that reminded everyone watching why baseball still had the capacity to make people feel things they were not expecting to feel. He straightened slightly. Gave a small nod to no one in particular. And then he walked away from the microphone. Because some things, when you have said enough of them, are better left to settle on their own. Shohei Ohtani walked off that field surrounded by opponents who had become something else entirely. And Don Kelly could not hide what that did to him. Nobody could.